Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday morning. It's Dave Neal, stand-up comic host of Bachelor Nation News, and I've got some beef that we expected would come out of this Nick Viall podcast with Victoria Fuller and Greg Grippo, which hasn't even aired yet, but Blake Horstmann is airing out the hypocrisy. He says the reason Bachelor Nation is in my rear view mirror is because of hypocritical asses like him. I don't know if he meant for the ass/rear pun, but we are here for it. Okay, so we're going to get into that story, of course, later today. The podcast heard round the neighborhood, the cul-de-sac, or the Bachelor Nation cul-de-sac, will be the conversation between Victoria Fuller, Greg Grippo, and Nick Viall, of course, which will share their side of what went down following her breakup after Bachelor in Paradise's proposal to Johnny D. Filippo. So let's get into it. Follow me on Instagram at DNeals. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/Dave Neal. By the way, Saturday night was my sold-out show in Newport, Rhode Island, 23-minute set. If you want to see that, it's on Patreon, patreon.com/Dave Neal to watch the full thing.
New York, LA, you name it, he's been there. Please give it up for Dave Neal, everybody.
So if you want to check that out, you can. It is live. It is out there. It is raw and unfiltered, and that's where that is. Okay, so yesterday we shared this video, timeline debunked by fans. We had a fan account debunk the timeline, which is what went down between Greg Grippo and Victoria Fuller and how it went down. And this fan had mentioned she saw them getting cozy together on September 8th. We had that full story. So they posted that it's hard to believe that there wasn't a line crossed with emotional cheating. So we'll cover more into that with the next video on Victoria Fuller once we have the podcast episode, because we have more information from this source confirming what she meant by they got cozy together. And she shares that she saw them sitting next to each other on a couch. Not a big deal. But if you're engaged to someone and you're out at a nightclub with somebody else, sharing a couch together in a dark environment, one could imagine. So we've got more of those screen grabs coming your way. So here's what was posted by Victoria Fuller. We're exhausted, we're drained, but we're happy, and we're sorry if we have offended anyone. But we do hope y'all tune in to Viall Files soon. All right, it's almost like we have the dark side of Bachelor Nation, and then we've got the light side, and people just choose which side they're on. And I'm not saying Victoria's on one side or the other, because in some ways there's plenty of characteristics of Victoria Fuller that I love within the way she handles Bachelor Nation. I love that she's doesn't take anything from fans. She speaks how it is. I love all that, and but I'm assuming what we'll hear in their conversation is something about how she was treated a certain way by Johnny, and we'll have to just line up the receipts and see what she says. So Blake says this. All right, I have gotten a lot of these. I love y'all, and like I said the other day, I'm super thankful for all of you, but with that being said, please don't send stuff like this. And this is what someone sent. Did you see Nick V read more texts on his podcast to try and defend Victoria? The reason Bachelor Nation is in my rear view mirror is because of hypocritical asses like him. These kind of things are just triggering and happen all too often. Thanks. Now, of course, you can Blake can decide not to share this, but I appreciate him sharing it. He's calling out the hypocritical nature of what Nick is doing. And we're going to get into that exactly, but we've already seen it happen. So some of the comments from people, actually, I'll save the comments for a minute. So here's what Blake's talking about. Here is a clip from Nick, his podcast. I'll just read what Bachelor Rabbit Hole says. Y'all know I keep it real with you, so believe me when I say this podcast was complete dumpster fire. The biggest takeaway here is that Nick will be interviewing Victoria next week. Nick promoted this podcast episode by sharing a clip of Natalie saying she had quote-unquote receipts to prove the timeline of Victoria Johnny's break and Victoria's first date in Rome. Natalie never showed the receipts. She just told a story about text messages sent back and forth between her and Victoria. So anyway, the text messages being the sort of proof that Victoria was single because she says she was. Now, the reason why this makes Blake so upset is because he was, of course, hyper-criticized for sharing text messages from Kaylin that vindicated him. I'm vindicated. I'm selfish. I am wrong. And, of course, we've got the 16 different videos in that feud where we had Grocery Store Joe defending Nick. We had the Bachelor podcast pretty much taking sides with Nick over Katie, which is always interesting when there's two former leads going at it. And of course, Katie was upset that Nick Viall exposed her private messages, and he kind of said, "Why would she?" And actually, you know what? Better than paraphrasing it, let's just go into it. Nick and Natalie Joy addressed Katie Thurston's revelation that she blocked him. She is platforming a lie. So of course, Katie mentioned it flippantly in a 10-second, kind of comment on her TikTok or Instagram Live or one of those things, and then they went on to do a 20 or 30-minute rebuttal. So anyway. During a new episode of the Viall Files podcast, the couple, which is Nick and Natalie, called out Thurston's decision to name drop her contestants after her season wrapped last summer. I hear so much while hosting the Viall Files about everyone. There's so much that I know, which is part of why I have this rule. If people want to put stuff out there for us to respond to, then fine. But I don't want to be airing people's laundry that I hear or how they treated other people. And my rule is very similar, that I'm not going to comment on Nick's girlfriend unless it's something that has to do with Bachelor Nation. Of course, this is a story. I have heard some horror stories about my peers, but I don't want to put it all out there. It's almost as if Katie feels like she has this ownership over these guys from her season. I think when Nick says he's heard horror stories about his peers, he means Katie. I think he's implying, I know a lot about her, and I'm not sharing it. Which really, it's like everyone hears everything about everybody. It really got me when I got tagged in a cute little TikTok reel on Instagram of Miss Katie Thurston speaking about Nick. I watch it, and this is from Natalie Joy. I watch it, and I was just very confused because it starts off with something asking, why does Nick... Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is from Katie Thurston. Why does Nick Viall hate you? And she says, Nick Viall is blocked from my phone, like she has some sort of reason to block Nick. I know for a fact that Nick has only ever tried to help her and give her advice, which she has never taken. So, of course, Natalie Joy, Nick's girlfriend, says Nick's only tried to help Katie, and Katie's just not following Nick, and Katie has no reason to block Nick. And, of course, Katie has said not the exact reason why she blocked him, but because it was a violation of trust. Katie blocked Nick because he violated her trust by sharing information that was only meant for her. She had her trust violated. That's the easiest way to put it. We could get into specifics, and maybe someday we will, but that's where that stands. So when they go, why did she block me? Well, better off not making it public because it probably wouldn't make you look good. That's the answer. As far as I'm concerned, as far as what I know. So in their airing out those text messages from Katie, where essentially Nick aired out Natalie Joy aired out text messages that didn't really prove anything. It was just Katie sharing information with them. Point being, Nick in that case was dabbling in a hypocritical world because he had already blasted Blake for defending himself. Now we say all that to read some of these comments from the audience. I do think that Nick is funny. I do think that Nick is funny about criticizing Blake for things he does or the same things he praises others for. For example, vilify Blake for sharing texts, but he does that repeatedly. He took a disliking to Blake for being a F-boy and then praises Victoria for her fiasco with Johnny and Greg. Nick warns people to stop bullying his girlfriend for that birthday post, but profits off of Maddie's genuine and real, speculates on Chris's sexuality, and is Bachelor Nation's bully. Nick never takes a good look at the mirror. I wouldn't even use all those examples. I think some of those examples are not, maybe me nitpicky. When you do a podcast every week, you may say things that turn out to be not exactly what you want to say or this or that. So I can look at what Nick does and takes a lot of that with a grain of salt. That is not bullying. But of course, yeah, for Nick to keep on calling Blake an F-boy and then sort of champion Vic and Greg, that is a good example of saying, look, if you're going to call it out on all angles. Is Victoria an F-girl? Does that dabble into slut-shaming? Is it slut-shaming to call an F-boy an F-boy? I don't know. Nick thinks it's okay for text to be read or released when it helps his narrative. So people exposing their thoughts on this whole matter. So here's what Nick had posted regarding the Victoria story, or this is what he said on this podcast regarding the Victoria story, which is what the commenter on Blake's Instagram DMs was referencing.
Between, when Johnny and Victoria took a break or ended their engagement versus when did Greg and Victoria start talking romantically. We will certainly get the answers from Victoria and Greg
lucky for y'all.
them.
Lucky for y'all, I do have the receipts.
I do be getting
And I
them
feel
to
like
Thank
every
God.
time I'm on here, I do be reading text messages.
I do be reading text messages. And of course, she didn't in this case, but she, of course, admits there to have reading them. And of course, we call that AAVE, African American Vernacular, I believe is what it's called. I think that relates to Ebonics, but I don't know how they speak in Alabama. But when she says, I do be reading text messages, people, of course, are criticizing the potential offensive impression there. But maybe she do be reading text messages. Maybe she just has doesn't have proper grammar. I'm not sure, folks. That's for you to decide. But that's where we stand in the story. So as far as let's do a little web map here. We have Katie Thurston v. Nick Viall, Blake Horstmann v. Nick, courtesy of defending Katie. Now we have Blake Horstmann v. Nick, courtesy of defending himself against the idea that Victoria and Greg are not F couples. Is it an F couple? F boy, F girl, F couple? Either way, point being is there's the side of taking moral superiority, and when you do, you have to apply that to everybody or else you're being a hypocrite. So Blake's basically saying, don't treat me a certain way and others another way. We'll have to see how this plays out. It could be that Nick interviews Victoria, calls her sloppy, calls her messy, calls these other things. Now, it's much easier when you call your friend out for things than somebody else. So, of course, if he does that, it would be to like set the record straight. My guess with Nick in the podcast that we'll hear in a little while, and by the way, I am traveling to New York City today. Shows this weekend. If you want to come by Thursday, Friday, go to my Linktree, linktree.com/Dave Neal, where I'll have tickets there to the Thursday show at Westside Comedy Club, 7 p.m. I think it's on 72nd Street. What are we going to go to? Jake's Dilemmas after? Get some cheap kind of flat beers? Nothing like a nice flat beer and a sticky floor. Am I right, guys? Either way, we're going to have to see how this all plays out. But it could be that Nick holds Victoria very accountable. I don't know. I'm holding my breath. We'll have to see. Let me know what you guys think. More coming your way right after this. Bye, guys.